Okay, I would like to welcome everybody to the Finance Committee meeting. Today is October 8th. It is 6 o'clock. And we can open the meeting and run right to the agenda. Public comment. I'm thinking we're remote and do we have any public with us that would like to comment?
Negative, Mr. Chair. There are nobody else other than you signed into the Zoom.
Okay. So moving right along to the meeting minutes. Can I get a motion to approve the meeting minutes for September 17th, 2024?
So moved.
I second it.
Okay, motion a second. All in favor of approving the minutes, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, now we are good with the meetings for September 17th. And our fourth order of business is to review and vote on the warrant articles. And Colin, I believe you're going to walk us through that.
Absolutely.
So I will turn it over to you right at this time.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Chair. So the way I will do this, for those that are new to the Finance Committee, as a part of town meeting, we're required to publish what we call the Finance Committee Guidebook. The guidebook includes every warrant article, an explanation, as well as the vote to recommend or not recommend by both the Select Board and the Finance Committee. So as I go through these, I'll introduce each article one at a time. These are all pretty straightforward. So we are looking like we'll have a brief town meeting on October 22nd, but all very important. After I explain it, I'll take a minute to see if anyone has questions, and then I'd be looking for a motion to either recommend or not recommend, followed by a vote, depending on how the committee's feeling. And again, your votes tonight will be included in the Finance Committee Guidebook. If you've been to town meeting, you see they're also included in our town meeting presentation as well. So with that, I'll start with Article 1. Article 1 is an appropriation for the general fund for fiscal year 2025 to see if the town will vote to raise and appropriate and or transfer from available funds such sums of money as may be necessary to fund town expenses for fiscal year 25 as follows, or take any other action relative thereto. I want to make a disclaimer here. I've done this in every select board presentation. This is not a new tax. At town meeting in May, we present you a level funded budget within the town's tax levy. The way that DOR certifies your budget is that all you have to show is the revenue that supports the budget that you present. And so when we present our town meeting budget, although we're showing that the revenues and the expenditures match, in reality, we always have what we call excess levy capacity. That's excess local receipts or excess room within that 2.5% to spend more money. Tyngsborough does a very conservative budgeting process. So for instance, in fiscal year 2025, we left about $400,000 on the table. Now, that's good news because that becomes part of our certified free cash at the end of the year, which funds capital programs and also will support the middle school debt. So I say that to say that by appropriating this money today, which you'll see is coming out of fiscal year 25 local receipts, that includes building permits, licensing fees, meals tax, excise tax from the state. It does not include your real estate taxes. So when we presented a budget at May town meeting, that is what is the basis of the tax rate that the Department of Revenue will certify. By appropriating this money tonight, you are not increasing the taxes on residents of the town of Tyngsborough. Just want to be clear on that. So we have 4 items. The first 2 are related to a mistake that I made. I take full ownership. The town several years ago made an agreement with the Sewer Commission, which, as you all know, operates a separate enterprise fund, to reduce the impact of the Phase 1 West and Phase 2 sewer expansion, to reduce the impact that the betterment, which is assessed to properties along the project, would have on them. The town agreed to use the operating budget to fund a certain amount of the borrowing each year until the project's paid off. Our sewer department sent me the borrowing schedule just before budget time, and I assumed it was for my information only. I did not put it on the warrant. So this is an obligation we already have. It's not a new obligation. But again, because town meeting didn't authorize it, we'll need them to authorize it. So that is $109,588 for Phase 2. Again, that's the debt for a project that's already complete. And $32,240 for Phase 1 West. Again, another project that is already complete. And the debt service is not new debt. That's already included in the town's debt right now. So it's not like we're incurring new debt. It's again just helping with the sewers portion of it. The final two items are also pretty straightforward. These are the differences between the wages that were set by town meeting in May and the final wages owed to employees in these two collective bargaining units because the contracts were not settled before town meeting. So we went into town meeting making certain assumptions about where we would settle all of our employment contracts. We had 6 expire this year. These two lingered beyond town meeting, and so what you're looking at is $23,567.34, which represents the difference between what town meeting allocated for our police superior union, that's the bargaining unit that represents sergeants and lieutenants, and what we actually settled the contract. So the contract was settled at some point mid-August. This is the difference, and until town meeting appropriates the money, the wages can't be paid out. Same thing with that bottom number, $21,207.14. That's to fund the difference between what town meeting allocated, again, making an assumption for our communication specialist bargaining unit. Those are our dispatchers that work in the 911 center. And the amount of money we need to fund their salary for fiscal 25 based on the contract we settled in August. So high level, these are obligations we have today. They don't represent new employees. They don't represent new projects. They also do not represent an increase in our taxes. They're going to come from local receipts as outlined in the article, which is money that was already going to come into the town. All it will do is reduce the amount of free cash that gets certified at the end of the year.
Okay,
Okay.
Mr. Chair, anybody have any questions? Sorry.
Nope, all set.
Good.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend Article 1 as written.
I'll second that.
okay, we have a recommendation, a second. All in favor of recommending Article 1 as printed, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Okay, that is unanimous. Colin, Article 1 is good with the Finance Committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Article 2, although I think it's the lamest article on here, believe it or not, it's the one that requires the highest vote threshold. Massachusetts general law requires that 9/10 of town meeting approve prior year fiscal bills. These are simply bills that were incurred during a previous fiscal year. So in this case, most of them were from fiscal year 2024, which we just closed. Some of the sewer bills date back to fiscal year 23. Under Mass General Law, you're not allowed to pay for prior year bills using your current budget unless the appropriating body, which in Tyngsborough is town meeting, approves such an expenditure. So you'll see this on nearly every town meeting warrant. There's always a handful that sneak by because the services are provided, say, at the end of June, and by the time we get the invoices at the end of August, we've already closed the book. So you're looking at $80.13 from our engineering department to McGovern Ford, $710 to Tri-State Mechanical from our Council on Aging. Tri-State Mechanical is one of the vendors that maintains the HVAC handlers there. These two larger ones, which are coming out of the sewer enterprise fund, so these are not general fund items, these are enterprise fund expenses. This is because National Grid, as you have all probably experienced, will from time to time stop calculating your actual usage and conduct what they call a reset. And then after sometimes 6 months, 7 months, or a year, they'll issue you a correction bill where they tell you, oh, actually, we stopped billing you accurately. This is the amount you really owe. This does not mean that our sewer commission is using more electricity or that the rates skyrocketed. They're using just the same amount of electricity, but this is a billing issue on National Grid's part. So because of that, we have two bills, one totaling $222.26 and one totaling $4,258.67. And the last disclaimer I'll make on Article 2 is that this is not a new appropriation. So you won't be putting this money in these departments' budgets. They'll have to use their currently approved fiscal year 2025 budget to pay for these expenses.
Okay, this seems about as down the middle as anything could be. Any questions?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend Article 2 as written.
All right.
I'll second that.
Okay, a motion second. Everybody in favor of recommending Article 2 as printed, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Colin, that Article 2 is unanimous.
Fantastic, thank you. Moving right along to Article 3. Article 3 is one of two community preservation articles. Article 3 is to rescind, in part, prior funding authorization from the Community Preservation Committee Fund. to see if the town will vote to rescind a portion of the funding authorization voted at the May 7th, 2024 annual town meeting pursuant to Article 12 on the warrant, therefore, which portion authorized the expenditure of $350,000 to acquire the affordable unit identified as 10 Merrimack Way, Unit C. This was a item funded by the Community Preservation Committee in the May 2024 town meeting that would have allowed our Affordable Housing Trust to intervene in a foreclosure that was taking place on an affordable unit in town. The Affordable Housing Trust doesn't yet have funds available to them, so they rely on available funds from the CPC. Unfortunately, the auction, which we knew was a risk, took place the same day that town meeting considered this warrant article, and by the time town meeting authorized the funding, the auction had gone through and the unit was sold to a private buyer. Because that money is no longer necessary and was restricted for a specific purpose, in order to return that money to the CPC fund balance to then be reallocated, town meeting has to simply vote to rescind it. So we didn't have an opportunity to buy it. That money is going to sit there until town meeting puts it back in the CPC fund balance so that it can be used for another project. CPC met a few weeks ago and voted 8-0 to recommend this article to town meeting.
Okay, any questions or discussions on Article 3?
Pretty clear.
Mr. Chair, I
Okay.
can make a motion to recommend Article 3 as written.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, I have a motion, a second. All in favor of Article 3 as printed, signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Article 3 is unanimous.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moving right along to our second CPC appropriation, that's Article 4, to see if the town will vote a sum of money to be appropriated or reserved from estimated annual revenues of the Community Preservation Fund for fiscal year 2025, with each item to be considered a separate appropriation as follows. The first item that's up for consideration at this town meeting is $55,000 for the Tyngsborough Public Library for historic preservation projects. Some of you may be familiar, but if you're not, I'd encourage you to check it out. They have a special collections room in the library, which for a long time kind of became a dumping ground for historic artifacts that we got out of the Winslow School or the Littlefield Library. Over the last several years, with the help of volunteers, they've worked very hard to catalog everything that's in there. And in doing so, they've identified some pretty cool historic artifacts from Tyngsborough that they would like to, 1, preserve, and 2, display. So this funding will help purchase a large display case, which they'll be able to use to display in the library some of those artifacts. Right now, due to space constraints in that room, everything is stored in drawers and cabinets and not visible to the public. They'd also restore for display an old map of the town of Tyngsborough, which requires some pretty extensive preservation work. And finally, it would allow them to undertake what they're calling the oral history of the Winslow School project, which would basically be interviews, an audio story, if you will, from folks that went to school at the Winslow School to kind of start preserving history here in Tyngsborough. The purchase of the equipment for this project would allow them to do it for other preservation projects down the road. They had originally asked for a little bit less than the $55,000, but the CPC felt like it was an important project and they wanted them to have a little bit of a buffer, so they increased that amount to $55,000. The second appropriation is $550,000 for Phase 2 of the Sherburne Road Recreation Parcel. Both of these items would come out of the CPC fund balance, is an important note here. This second project, almost all of you should have seen, but if not, I'd encourage you to take a look. You may remember that when the Tyngsborough Country Club was sold to Toll Brothers, they donated a large parcel of land between Sherburne and Pawtucket Boulevard, with the intent that the town would develop that as a community space with sport amenities, walking trails, and fully renovated the clubhouse that sits on the property. CPC was fortunate enough to hold their last meeting in that clubhouse, so they got to see what a fantastic job our rec director, Allison Page, has done with it. At May 2023 annual town meeting, $800,000 from CPC was allocated to begin this work, and that work that was funded is being completed as we speak by Newport Construction. It includes pickleball courts, basketball courts, shuffleboard, bocce ball, a pitch and a putt. Ed can correct me, I'm sure I'm missing a bunch, but there's quite a bit of amenities, and if you drive by today, they did some of the paving. What we're now looking to do is we stood back and we looked at what the committee, which was a committee of residents, representatives from different boards, they had all kinds of ideas based on public feedback on what should go to that parcel to really make it a community spot. And so what we're looking to do with Phase 2 is to finish up some of the larger items that we discussed as possibilities, but weren't available as a part of phase one. So what does that mean? Specifically, the construction of a pavilion on the site, which will really create our first community gathering space on that side of the bridge.
Mhm.
It would include the construction of a volleyball court, which was included in the contract we put out to bid this spring. Unfortunately, the numbers came in too high and we couldn't afford to award it at the time. It would also include some landscaping features, and most importantly, it will include replacing what is currently about a half a mile stone dust trail with a fully accessible asphalt walkway. If you go to the site right now, you'll notice that there's probably about 400 feet of an asphalt walkway kind of adjacent to Sherburne Ave. It serves as basically the sidewalk. At the end of it, there's a stone dust trail, which would make you think you can meander across the property. The stone dust trail is in poor condition. If you walk it ever, you'll notice there are hills, it's inaccessible.
Mhm.
And so we're really trying to make every parcel we invest substantial amount of money in accessible. So again, they asked for slightly less than this request, but the committee, the CPC, at least 7 members of it, felt like it was important enough that they should increase that. So CPC recommended this 7-1. Fortunately, we'll be able to take advantage of the fact that we have a contractor mobilized as we speak, who is prepared to honor original pricing, which is a cost savings to the town, and with which we could execute a change order so that both the volleyball court and the walkway could be constructed as a part of the current contract, of course, pending town meeting approval. So that's why we thought it was timely to ask fall town meeting for it. But again, I'd encourage anybody on the finance committee and folks listening at home to take a look at that parcel because we've really done quite a bit of work over there. And
Yep.
once we get these amenities in, I think that, we'll be looking about what's missing, talking to residents to see what else could go there.
Hey, Colin, will this work be done in the next few months, or does it also go into the spring?
There will be limited work that will need to continue into the spring, most likely. One of the
Mhm.
things that our contractor put us on notice about is especially on the sport courts, the final surfaces are best applied under certain weather conditions.
Yeah.
So depending on how much they get done this fall, it may be in our best interest to have the rest of the work done early spring. I mean, the reality is it's getting warmer earlier, so I'm not saying we'd have to wait till April or May. And I think our thought process is because we are spending so much money, sure, they could rush it through at the end of November, maybe early December, but we don't want to have to be repairing it in the next 5 years.
And has that 800 already been spent and for the basketball and pickleball, all that, fully utilized the 800?
Yes, that $800,000 is fully allocated as of today.
Okay, thank
And
you.
that was the only funding source, I should note. That was the only funding source for this project.
Okay,
Carl, I know we had talked about, I'm still getting just tired, the Sherburne Road Recreation Parcel. We had talked about changing that name to Ironwood.
Yes.
I'm just, you know what I mean? I think a lot of us have done here in the Sherburne Road, we talked about the naming of it. And I think a lot of us really like the name that Allison picked out, Ironwood, because it has, the ironwood's a tree, and then iron and wood, falls in place with a golf course. I think it's a fantastic name. Did the selectmen ever vote on that naming on it yet, or?
That will appear on the select boards. The next time they have a full board meeting is November 4th. So it'll
Okay.
appear on there. I have spoken to members of the select board and everybody agrees. Nobody more than me that calling it the Sherburne Road open space parcel is getting a little obnoxious. So at that first meeting in November, we'll ask them to name it. And I've talked to you, Ed. I certainly agree. That's a great name.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also too, on the walkway, not only is it rough shape, I mean, we need it to be ADA compliant, you know what I mean? So that's one of the main reasons to do it in asphalt, so, people that are handicapped in wheelchairs
Yeah.
have ease of time using it and ease of access to it.
I'm really glad they're doing that. I mean, I'm looking at it now. It's out my kitchen window. And
Oh,
I'm really glad that
I
they're
drove
gonna
by
be
today and saw the
because
asphalt.
I've
I
been
was
on the
like,
stone dust and it's a mess.
yeah,
Yeah,
but it was nice seeing the asphalt go down today. I drive by there twice a day, in and out of there,
yeah.
watching
I'm
all
looking
of
at it all the time.
it's nice to see it.
I love it.
All right, Mr.
All
Chairman,
right.
I make a motion to recommend Article 4 as printed.
Second,
All right, we have a motion, a second. All in favor for Article 4, please signify by saying aye.
aye,
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? That is unanimous. Those, good to go.
Excellent. Moving right along, just want to record that here. All right. Article 5 is an amendment to the town's general bylaw regarding the prohibition of beaching motorboats on the shore of Lake Muscuppick. At least 2 of you are very familiar with this issue. The long and short of it is that over the summer months, because of the geographical location of Lake Muscuppick and the fact that there is a state-owned boat ramp, which neither the town of Dracut nor the town of Tyngsborough can control, Lake Muscuppick often becomes hectic, to say the least. The town of Tyngsborough has done its part, thanks to generous contributions from the Lake Association, to put police officers on the water as much as possible. Obviously, there are limits within our overtime budget, and there can't be cops on there all the time. One of the things that both our police department and residents in the neighborhood have noticed is that a substantial issue exists with people beaching or parking their watercraft, whether it's jet skis or boats, on public shoreline. That's an issue for a few reasons. One, it's a nuisance and it prohibits passive use of the shoreline, like fishing or people hanging out on the shore, but also it poses a public safety risk because if, for instance, there was an accident on the lake and our police boat had to transport a victim quickly to a waiting ambulance, on a very busy summer day, there are often very little, if any, public spaces available for our boat to beach to then transfer a patient. And so in working with the Lake Association and with the Tyngsborough Police Department, we reviewed our bylaws and are recommending that the bylaws be amended to strictly prohibit that. And you'll notice there was already a section in the town's bylaw, which is superbly out of date, that deals with motorboats. And I'll note that the legal term motorboat covers all things like a jet ski, a boat, and personal watercraft that have an engine. So what we're proposing here is that we'd add section 6. Again, this strictly prohibits it, except in the case of emergency. And again, that's just leaving some discretion for the officer. The first violation would be $100 and the second would be $250 moving forward. The only other change you'll see here is that because this article is so outdated, the penalty section restricted the fine to no more than $20. So for the rest of the offenses, we're leaving it that way. But for this one, because we feel it's so important, we're changing it to $100 and then $250. And then we also just added some language at the bottom. The town is authorized to enforce the provisions of Article 10, including Section 6, under the non-criminal disposition process, and we cite the law. This is the piece that gives us the teeth that would allow a Tyngsborough police officer, a state environmental police officer, or any law enforcement officer with jurisdiction to issue that citation in the same way that if you are caught with marijuana on school property, for instance, you'd be issued a non-criminal disposition. So this was recommended by the select board. It's been reviewed by town council. It's not going to solve all of our problems, and we've also shared with the town of Dracut. We're hoping because we share the lake with Dracut that they'll adopt a similar bylaw. But I think this is a good start for us to be able to give teeth to our officers who are trying to enforce even just common sense and respect on the water.
Yeah, there is no good reason to have motorboats anywhere near the Tyngsborough Town Beach. That's for sure. So,
All right, Mr. Chairman, can I make a motion to recommend Article 6? That's 6, right?
5.
5. Article 5 as written.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of recommending Article 5, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Article 5 is recommended unanimously by Finance.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Moving right along, Article 6 is a zoning bylaw amendment relative to the town sign bylaw, and Mr. Clausen is a member of the zoning review committee, so this will be familiar to him. As most of you will remember, some years ago, we undertook a really comprehensive look at our town zoning bylaw using grant funding. And the point was to figure out where there were inconsistencies in the bylaw, make the bylaw easier to read so that it's business friendly, but also for our staff who have to enforce the provisions of it and our land use boards, make it a little clearer. So we did a lot of this work over the last 2 years. One of the last remaining items that brought discomfort or was kind of irritating for both business owners and the town was our sign section. Previously, and assuming this passes before this was passed, the sign regulations appeared in multiple places in the zoning bylaw. There were serious inconsistencies One section said one thing, another section said the other. There was ambiguities about what the different signs meant. I had never heard of a gas station changeable copy sign before I looked at our bylaw. And so what the zoning review committee did over the last 7 months was take all of the zoning regulations regarding signs, put them into one section, and you can see it's a long article, but if you scroll, organize them by charts based on the location of the sign and the type of sign. So this really creates a one-stop shop for people to see what they can and cannot do with signs. A lot of the areas that we addressed inconsistencies or ambiguities, we leaned on the experience of members of our zoning board of appeals, which often hears variances or appeals on decisions about signs to see what businesses we're dealing with and what were some of the common cases. So there are no real substantial changes here in Article 6, except for that we are taking a bunch of sections and putting them into one and clarifying the chart. I will note that the planning board held a public hearing as they're required to under state law on October 3rd. There was no public comment and they voted 3-0 in favor of this article being presented to town meeting.
Colin, was there any specific issues driving this this change, or is it just a matter of simply cleaning up the bylaws?
Both.
Both?
There were a lot of inconsistencies, and the problem with the inconsistencies in our bylaws is that you don't realize they're inconsistencies until one of your land use boards issues a decision that then gets appealed to the court, and a judge says, "Yeah, go back to the town. This doesn't make sense." So that kind of started us off on the goal of updating all of our zoning bylaws. As it relates to signs, signs are kind of a hot issue that people driving through neighborhoods notice. They call and complain. And when our building commissioner is looking at the zoning bylaw, if it's not clear, there's a liability in the town saying, no, you can't have this sign because X, Y, and Z if it's not clearly pointed out. So it's kind of a mix of both. Our hope is, on top of us cleaning up the town so we don't become a town with a bunch of waving flags, this will also give an easy kind of how-to for businesses and residential properties alike about what you can and can't do.
Good, thank you.
Any further discussion or questions?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend Article 6 as written.
Okay,
I'll second that.
all right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of Article 6 as printed, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, abstain. Article 6 is recommended unanimously.
Fantastic. I'll move to the last zoning one. Article 7 is tied to the changes made in Article 6. The one thing I'll note is that this does make not really a substantial change. You may know, or you may not know that in the town zoning bylaws, technically billboards are prohibited. That's because they lacked any information or designation in the town zoning bylaw. One of the things the review committee thought about was Route 3 is obviously a busy corridor. We looked at how many large parcels are privately owned, and the possibility for Route 3 to become littered with billboards was so great that the committee felt it was important to clarify what is already existing by having no regulations, that bylaws or that billboards are prohibited. And so to do that, we've added the definition in here. We also clearly defined a gasoline station changeable copy sign. I will note, because the question will come up, if billboards are prohibited, how are there 2 in town with a third on the way? The reality is that all 3 of them received variances from the zoning board. A variance essentially says you are exempt from the rules. So those, you can't, it doesn't become a precedent. The zoning board doesn't have to grant those variances. In fact, by codifying that they're banned through these bylaw amendments, we'll be protecting ourselves so that it doesn't happen again. The current billboards will stay. Obviously, they're a prior non-conforming use. We would have to really try hard to get rid of them, but you won't see any future billboards. Again, a public hearing was held on October 3rd. There was no public comment, and the planning board voted 3-0 to recommend.
Okay, questions on Article 7?
Nope.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make a motion to recommend Article 7 as written.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of Article 7, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed, abstain. Colin, that is unanimous as well to recommend Article 7.
Fantastic. Thank you, Mr. Chair. All right, last article is Article 8, borrowing and appropriation, capital improvement for fiscal year 2025. To see if the town will vote to raise, appropriate, and borrow the sum of $900,000, and that the town be authorized to accept any available grant funds for the purposes of funding the following capital requests or take any other action relative thereto. What we're looking at here is a recommendation from the Capital Asset Management Committee to authorize the town to borrow up to $900,000 to replace a fire engine. The backstory on this, as best as I can, is that for years, probably the last 3 years, the fire department has listed on their 5-year capital plan the need to replace engine 2, which is a primary engine housed on Lakeview Ave Station on the east side of town. Over the years, it's a 20-year-old pumper, so it is way past its life expectancy. It was their top priority in fiscal year 25, so for the current fiscal year. However, at the time that Capital, Finance, and the Select Board were discussing the fiscal 25 capital plan, we were really prioritizing not doing any borrowing because it was going to be the first year there was any impact for the middle school, and we wanted to use the remaining ARPA funds. In order to achieve that, the fire department and my office agreed that they had 2 items on their fiscal 26 plan that we could comfortably afford in fiscal 25 without borrowing, and that they could do their best to make that pumper last an additional year. That was going well until over the summer, it started to experience issues with what they call the spinal cord. It's a long electrical cable that runs from the front to the back of the pumper. At first, the issues were minor. It affected the emergency lights and sirens, and so because it was stationed at the Lakeview station, it was never a first due apparatus anyway, so we would respond from the center station. This would respond with traffic, so no lights or sirens. The key part was we were able to pump water out of the engine and put it on a fire. Unfortunately, 3 or 4 weeks ago, it stopped pumping water. And so we spent 2 weeks with a tech on scene here in Tyngsborough, looking at it, and we determined that that spinal cord is essentially so fried that it could never really be repaired. Fortunately, we were able to make some temporary adjustments to it. So as of this evening, it will pump water, but given the unreliability of it, both the fire chief and myself felt like we would be doing a disservice to the town to wait until May to flag this as an issue. A couple things on it. If we were to fund this in May, which I feel comfortable saying we would have to, it would need to be a borrowing article. The capital plan is funded by free cash, typically about $350,000, maybe $400,000, and the remainder of that is borrowing. Now, fortunately, for the last 4 years, we've had the American Rescue Plan Act funds available, so we've done no capital borrowing, which is why our debt to operating budget ratio is dramatically below the 10% that our financial policies recommend. Additionally, one of the things I said to the fire chief was if we're going to ask town meeting in October to consider a request that typically we'd see in May, I'd like us to be able to say that we have an engine available to purchase sooner than later. And so the fire chief and assistant chief, Pat Sands, spent a lot of time talking to fire truck vendors. We've identified 2 engines that are available on a lot as of today. They're demo units, so they build a full fire engine with all the bells and whistles, and then when the new model comes out, it has no purpose for that fire company anymore, so they sell it typically at a discounted rate to a fire agency that can purchase it. On top of that, and because there's no guaranteeing that those 2 will be available after October 22nd, we've also identified another vendor who is expecting to get a truck in February that they could build out specifically for Tyngsborough's needs. So while we could wait till May, and if we were saying that we were going to completely build a brand new one, you're probably looking at 12 to 16 months. Given the unreliability of our current pumper, the fact that it's housed on the east side of town, which unfortunately is where most of our water trouble spots are, where there's not enough water access and we'd be relying on the pumper, and because we believe we'd be able to get one sooner, it makes sense to do it now. I'd also note, as you were all aware, our AA+ bond rating was just affirmed. Interest rates are low. The bond for the middle school, which isn't on the agenda, but I'll note, sold at a 3.69% interest rate over the course of the loan. So now is the time to do it. And again, we felt like because it's such a critical public safety asset, we had no choice but to bring it forward. It was recommended unanimously by Capital Asset and the Select Board. And I want to note we've got 3 quotes so far. All of them are below $900,000. the way borrowing works is you have to ask for a specific dollar amount. You may remember this from the middle school vote, but we would only borrow the amount necessary to purchase the truck. So I think one of the quotes was in the 600,000s, one was in the 700,000s, and one was in the low 800,000. So hopefully we get one of the cheaper ones, but this would address a critical public safety need. And that's why I think it's timely.
Okay,
So you're gonna
So-
borrow, you're basically gonna borrow half, is that what you're saying? You're
What does
gonna
that
take some- You're gonna borrow half the money, you said? You're gonna take some out of, free cash?
No, so the free cash we would reserve for, because this is only one item that will appear in the fiscal 26 capital plan, we would reserve that free cash for other capital items. I mean, if we consider this in May, you'd be looking at a fire pumper, you'd be looking at different capital requests from other departments. If we depleted the free cash now, we wouldn't be able to fund anything in May.
You're gonna fund the whole thing. How long's that loan gonna be for?
So that's a great question. I'm glad you asked. We would start by issuing a short-term ban. So those are only for 1 year. The reason is I expect, depending on what exists on the fiscal 26 capital plan, that we probably need to borrow some additional money in May for the rest of the capital plan. And so it wouldn't make sense for us to lock ourselves into a 10-year bond now, knowing we're going to reopen this in May. So that's one piece. Additionally, with the middle school, we just last night, the select board approved a $50 million bond, which will get us almost completely to the end of the project. The way that the middle school or the Massachusetts School Building Authority reimbursements operate will kind of be cut off from the state for up to 18 months after the project is complete while they do a full project audit. And so that's money we were expecting to pay the bills. So typically what happens is you would do a short-term ban for that amount of money. So by doing a 1-year ban here, we're allowing ourselves to tack on other debt that we would otherwise need. And then we would lock it into a 10-year permanent bond. The last piece that I'll remind folks, I did this last night, the select board, because we haven't borrowed in 4 years, except for the middle school, most people's understanding or familiarity with borrowing is that this is on top of your regular tax bill. That's only for a debt exclusion like the middle school. All of this would be funded within the regular operating budget's debt service, and that is within the 2.5%. So a vote yes on this isn't increasing your taxes. I would have to find the money to pay for it every year in the operating budget.
Okay.
All right.
okay, and Colin, this would not affect our bond rating, in your opinion, is that correct?
Absolutely not. Yeah, we haven't done any borrowing in at least 4 years. In fact, our financial policies say that we should maintain borrowing of up to 10%. We're dramatically below that. I think we're somewhere in the high 3%.
Okay,
Okay.
Yeah, and this truck is over, I was part of that capital asset meeting. This truck is a 2000, right? The truck is 24 years old. So I think it's just a matter of public safety that, you know, definitely in favor of moving forward on this for sure.
Now, how much, now, is that old truck sellable?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there are crazy, people go crazy on these types of municipal auctions. A great example, the last 2000 pumper that we sold 3 years ago didn't drive, but somebody paid $7,000 to salvage parts from it. They came, they towed it away. So yes, we will absolutely, it will not be kept in service. It will go to a surplus auction, and any of the proceeds don't go back to the fire department. They go back into the general fund to be reappropriated at the next town meeting.
Very good.
All right, Mr. Chair, I can make a motion to recommend Article 8 as printed.
I'll
Second. Beat you, Earl.
Yep.
okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor of recommending Article 8 as printed, please signify by saying aye.
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 Opposed? Abstain? Okay, Colin, Article 8 is unanimous. I think that makes us unanimous for everything, which is great.
Certainly does. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So motion to adjourn?
Second.
All right, all in favor of adjourning, please signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Yep, we don't even need to ask the rest. We are adjourned. Have a great night, everybody.
Thanks,
You
everyone.
too.
Thank you.
After my next meeting. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.